Picture this. You're fighting in the frozen forests of Belgium during the deadliest winter of World War II. Artillery shells scream overhead. The ground trembles beneath your feet. Your fellow soldiers are dying around you. And you're just a private, the lowest rank in the army. You have no authority. You have no special training. You're just a rifleman with a job to do. Now, imagine doing something so extraordinarily brave, so impossibly heroic that you become the most decorated private in the history of the United States Army. More medals than captains. More honors than majors. A legend forged not in the officer's mess, but in the blood and mud of the front. This isn't fiction. This isn't Hollywood. This is the true story of Maurice "Footsie" Britt, and if you've never heard of him, you're about to discover why it's a crime against history itself. Picture a man who had everything to lose. A professional football career with the Detroit Lions. Youth, strength. A future guaranteed to be filled with fame and fortune. Now picture that same man voluntarily walking away from all of it to become the lowest-ranked soldier in the United States Army. Not because he had to, not because he was drafted, but because his country needed him, and Maurice Britt was the kind of man who answered when duty called. What would you do? Seriously, stop and think about it. If you had a professional sports contract, if you were living the American dream, would you give it all up to carry a rifle through the deserts of North Africa and the mountains of Italy? Would you trade stadiums full of cheering fans for battlefields full of enemy soldiers trying to kill you? Maurice Britt did, and what he accomplished after making that choice will leave you speechless. Before we dive into this incredible tale, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. Why? Because stories like this deserve to be told, and if you love uncovering the forgotten heroes of World War II, this channel is your new home. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. This is a 3-part series, and each episode gets more intense than the last. Maurice Britt wasn't supposed to be a war hero. Born on May 29, 1919, in the small town of Lone Oak, Arkansas, Maurice Lee Britt grew up in the American heartland during the Roaring '20s and the Great Depression. His family wasn't wealthy, far from it. His father worked hard to provide for the family during some of America's most challenging economic years, but the Britt household had something money couldn't buy. Strong values, a commitment to hard work, and the belief that character mattered more than circumstances. Young Maurice was an all-American kid who loved sports more than studying. He had energy to burn, natural athletic ability, and a competitive streak a mile wide. In high school, Maurice dominated on the football field. Standing 6 feet tall with the build of a natural athlete, broad shoulders, powerful legs, quick reflexes, Maurice was the kind of player that college scouts dream about finding in small-town America. But Maurice wasn't just physically gifted. He had football intelligence. He could read defenses, anticipate plays, and make split-second decisions under pressure. His coaches at Arkansas saw leadership potential in Maurice that went beyond the football field. They recognized that Maurice had the kind of character that would serve him well in any arena. Business, military, politics, whatever path he chose. Football was developing not just Maurice's body, but his discipline, his work ethic, and his ability to perform under pressure. During his college years, Maurice earned the nickname Footsie, a playful reference to his impressive footwork on the field. The nickname stuck, and for the rest of his life, those who knew Maurice best called him Footsie Britt. It was a reminder of where he came from, of the days when his biggest concern was catching touchdown passes rather than dodging enemy bullets. Maurice's college career culminated in recognition beyond Arkansas. National scouts took notice. The small-town Arkansas kid was good enough to play professionally. Really good. In 1941, before America entered World War II, Maurice Britt achieved what millions of young men could only dream of. He was drafted by the Detroit Lions of the National Football League. Let me emphasize what this meant in 1941. Professional football wasn't the billion-dollar industry it is today. Players didn't make millions. But the NFL was still the pinnacle of American football, the absolute highest level of competition. Being drafted meant you were among the best of the best. Maurice reported to the Detroit Lions training camp in the summer of 1941. He was 22 years old, in peak physical condition, and ready to prove he belonged in professional football. The competition was fierce. Veteran players who had been in the league for years, rookies from major universities fighting for roster spots, all competing for a limited number of positions. Maurice held his own. He impressed the coaches with his work ethic, his coachability, and his performance in practice. The Detroit Lions saw potential in this Arkansas kid. They envisioned Maurice developing into a key player, maybe even a star, over the next several seasons. Maurice was living the dream. Professional athlete, decent money for the era, fame and recognition, a career path that could set him up for life. What more could a 22-year-old kid from rural Arkansas want? And then, on December 7th, 1941, everything changed. Picture where you were, or where you imagined you'd be, when you heard the news that America had been attacked. For Maurice Britt and millions of other Americans, December 7th, 1941 was a day that divided their lives into before and after. Pearl Harbor was hit by Japanese forces. Thousands of American servicemen died in a single morning. The United States, which had been trying desperately to stay out of the war consuming Europe and Asia, was now fully engaged. War was no longer something happening overseas to other people. It was America's war now. Maurice Britt faced a choice. He could continue his football career. The NFL didn't shut down during the war. Teams continued playing, though many faced manpower shortages as players enlisted. Maurice could have played football, entertaining Americans who needed distraction from the grim war news while other men did the fighting. This would have been completely acceptable. Many athletes made this choice, and nobody questioned their patriotism. But Maurice couldn't do it. When he looked at himself in the mirror, when he thought about those sailors who died at Pearl Harbor, when he considered what was being asked of his generation, Maurice knew what he had to do. The football field suddenly seemed trivial compared to the real battle being waged across 2 oceans. Professional sports would have to wait. There was a war to win. Here's where Maurice Britt's story takes its first remarkable turn, a turn that reveals the depth of his character. With his education, his athleticism, and his natural leadership abilities, Maurice could have easily qualified for officer training. The military needed officers desperately, and a college-educated professional athlete would have been fast-tracked into a leadership position. Maurice could have started the war as a lieutenant, commanding men from a position of relative safety with better pay and privileges. But Maurice Britt wasn't interested in the easy path. He made a conscious decision that would define his entire military career. He enlisted as a private, the absolute bottom rung of the military ladder. No special treatment, no shortcuts, no leveraging his athletic fame for a cushy position, just a rifle and a willingness to serve alongside every other American who answered the call. Think about that for a moment. A professional athlete, educated, physically superior to most men, with connections that could have secured him a better position, and he chose to start at the bottom. He chose to be just another GI, one of millions, indistinguishable from the factory workers and farmers who filled the ranks of the Army. This decision tells us everything we need to know about Maurice Britt's character. He wasn't looking for glory or recognition. He wasn't trying to preserve his status or protect his future. He simply believed that if he was going to serve, he should serve the same way as everyone else. No better, no worse. Just a soldier doing his duty. Already, before firing a single shot in combat, Maurice Britt was demonstrating the qualities that would make him a legend. Maurice was assigned to the 30th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, a unit that would see some of the most brutal combat of the entire war. The 3rd Infantry Division, nicknamed the Rock of the Marne for their heroic stand in World War I, had a reputation to uphold. They needed men who could fight, endure, and never quit. They got Maurice Britt. Basic training in 1942 was unforgiving. Drill sergeants, who were often veterans of World War I, pushed recruits to their absolute limits. Forced marches with full packs and sweltering heat, endless physical training designed to build endurance, weapons training where mistakes could be deadly, hand-to-hand combat instruction, learning to dig foxholes, set up defensive positions, and survive on minimal sleep. Maurice thrived. While other recruits struggled and complained, Maurice attacked every challenge with the same intensity he'd brought to football. His athletic background gave him a huge advantage.
His body was already conditioned for punishment. His mind was trained to push through fatigue and discomfort. And his competitive nature meant that when drill sergeants demanded excellence, Maurice delivered. But it wasn't just Maurice's physical abilities that set him apart. His football experience had taught him about teamwork, about trusting the men beside you, about subordinating individual glory for the success of the unit. These lessons translated perfectly to infantry training. Maurice understood instinctively what many recruits struggle to learn. In combat, you survive or die as a unit, not as an individual. His fellow trainees noticed. Even though Maurice was a professional athlete, a source of pride that could have made him arrogant, he remained humble and approachable. He helped struggling recruits with their training. He shared tips about how to handle the physical demands. He never acted superior, even though by any objective measure, he was superior to most of the men around him. The training sergeants noticed too. They saw in Maurice Britt the qualities of a natural leader. They suggested repeatedly that Maurice should apply for officer candidate school. He had everything needed to be an officer: intelligence, education, physical capability, and the respect of his peers. Maurice declined. His reasoning was simple. He'd enlisted as a private, and he would serve as a private. He didn't want authority over other men. He wanted to fight alongside them as an equal. This wasn't false modesty. Maurice genuinely believed that he had no right to give orders when he hadn't yet proven himself in combat. By mid-1942, Private Maurice Britt had completed his training. He was now a qualified infantryman, proficient with rifles, machine guns, grenades, and all the other tools of his deadly trade. He was as ready for war as training could make him, but no amount of training truly prepares you for combat. Maurice was about to discover that the gap between training and reality was measured in blood. The answer came in November 1942, North Africa. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa, marked America's first major offensive against the Axis powers in the European theater. For Maurice Britt and thousands of other American soldiers, this would be their baptism by fire. The journey to North Africa was Maurice's first real taste of military operations. Crowded aboard transport ships with thousands of other soldiers, Maurice experienced the unique misery of wartime sea travel. Men packed into holds designed for far fewer people, the constant motion of the ship causing seasickness, the uncertainty about what awaited them on the far shore, and everywhere, the knowledge that enemy submarines were hunting the convoy. Maurice handled it better than most. His athletic conditioning helped him avoid the seasickness that incapacitated many soldiers, and his mental toughness allowed him to focus on preparation rather than worry. While other men fretted about the upcoming combat, Maurice studied his equipment, reviewed his training, and prepared himself mentally for whatever was coming. Imagine landing on a hostile shore, knowing that enemy forces are waiting somewhere in the desert beyond. The heat is suffocating, nothing like the Arkansas summers Maurice knew. The landscape is alien, endless sand and rock stretching to the horizon. The air smells of salt, sweat, and diesel fuel. And somewhere out there, experienced enemy soldiers who have been fighting since 1939 are preparing to stop you. This was Maurice's introduction to war. The initial landings met less resistance than expected. French forces in North Africa, nominally loyal to the Vichy government, put up only token resistance before surrendering. But the real enemy was waiting inland. Enemy forces were preparing to teach the Americans a harsh lesson about modern warfare. Maurice's first combat experience came during the advance from the beaches. His unit was moving through a small village when artillery opened up. The sound was unlike anything Maurice had experienced, a scream followed by an earth-shattering explosion. Shrapnel whined through the air, buildings collapsed, men screamed. Maurice hit the ground, his training taking over. Find cover, assess the situation, return fire if you can identify targets. But in the chaos of an artillery barrage, there's nothing to shoot at, just invisible death raining from the sky. All you can do is press yourself into whatever cover you can find and pray that the next shell doesn't have your name on it. The barrage lasted 10 minutes. 10 minutes that felt like hours. When it ended, Maurice looked around to see his first casualties.
Men he'd trained with, traveled with, men who moments before had been alive and now were torn corpses or writhing wounded. This was war, not the sanitized version from training films, but the real thing, ugly, random, unforgiving. But Maurice didn't freeze, didn't panic, didn't fall apart. He did what needed to be done, helped carry wounded to cover, redistributed ammunition from the dead to the living, prepared for whatever came next. His football experience, bizarrely, helped. He'd dealt with the chaos of the playing field, with rapidly changing situations requiring quick decisions. War was more deadly, but the mental framework was similar. Assess, adapt, act.
The North African campaign was brutal. Maurice's division pushed inland from the landing beaches, engaging enemy forces in a series of sharp, vicious battles. The desert warfare was unlike anything Maurice had trained for. Sandstorms could reduce visibility to 0 in seconds, filling eyes, mouths, and weapons with grit. The temperature swung from scorching heat during the day to near freezing cold at night. Water was more precious than ammunition. Cover was scarce on the open desert. But Maurice adapted. His athletic background served him well. The physical endurance required to march dozens of miles in the desert heat carrying 60 pounds of gear, the mental toughness to function on minimal sleep and bad food, the competitive drive to outthink and outfight the enemy. His fellow soldiers began to notice that Private Britt was different. While others complained or cracked under pressure, Maurice stayed focused, stayed effective, stayed alive. There were firefights in desert wadis where Maurice learned that combat was nothing like the shooting ranges of training. The targets shot back. They moved. They tried to flank you and kill you from unexpected angles. Maurice discovered he had a talent for combat, not because he enjoyed killing, but because he could stay calm when others panicked, could make tactical decisions quickly, and could shoot accurately even when under fire. The fighting in North Africa lasted from November 1942 until May 1943. 7 months of brutal combat that transformed the Green American Army into a battle-hardened fighting force. And Maurice Britt was part of that transformation. He participated in multiple engagements, learning the deadly trade of infantry combat through experience, how to spot enemy positions by reading terrain, how to move under fire without getting killed, how to coordinate with other soldiers in the chaos of battle. His squad leaders noticed Maurice's competence. His platoon commander took note, but Maurice remained a private, still refusing suggestions that he seek promotion or officer training. He was content to be just another rifleman, doing his job, watching out for his buddies, surviving one day at a time. By the time North Africa fell to the Allies in May 1943, with the surrender of over 250,000 Axis troops, Maurice Britt had become a veteran. He'd seen combat. He'd faced the enemy. He'd watched friends die. The professional football player from Arkansas was gone, replaced by a hardened infantryman who understood what war really meant. But North Africa was just the beginning. The real test was coming. July 1943. Operation Husky. The Allied invasion of Sicily, the first step toward liberating Europe from tyranny. Maurice Britt, still a private despite his growing reputation, landed with the 3rd Infantry Division on the southern coast of Sicily. The objective was clear: capture the island, knock Italy out of the war, and open up a new front. Simple on paper, deadly in execution. Sicily was a nightmare. The terrain was mountainous, perfect for defense. The enemy, recognizing Sicily's strategic importance, had prepared formidable defenses. Every hill, every village, every crossroad had to be taken by force, and they made the Americans pay in blood for every inch. This is where Maurice Britt began to truly shine. In the chaos of the Sicilian campaign, with shells exploding and bullets cracking through the air, Maurice discovered something about himself. He was extraordinarily good at war. Not in a psychopathic way, but in the way a master craftsman is good at his trade. He could read terrain instinctively. He could predict enemy movements. He could inspire the men around him through example. During one engagement, and we'll explore this in much greater detail in Part 2, Maurice's squad came under intense fire from an enemy machine gun position that had pinned down an entire platoon. Men were dying, The advance had stalled. Someone needed to do something. Maurice Britt did something. Without waiting for orders, Maurice began maneuvering toward the enemy position. Using every bit of cover, moving with the speed and agility of the athlete he was, Maurice worked his way close enough to engage the machine gun nest. What happened next would earn him his first medal. But that's a story for our next episode. The Sicilian campaign lasted 38 days. For Maurice Britt, those 38 days were a crucible that forged him from a good soldier into something more, something special. By the time Sicily fell, Maurice had been noticed, not just by his fellow soldiers, but by his commanders. The quiet private from Arkansas was developing a reputation. But Sicily was just practice compared to what was coming. The invasion of Italy, the winter line, the mountains, the mud, the death. Italy would become the graveyard of thousands of Allied soldiers, and it would become the stage where Maurice Footsie Britt would achieve the impossible. In Part 2, we're going to dive deep into Maurice Britt's extraordinary actions in Italy. We're going to walk through minute by minute the battles that earn him medal after medal. We're going to see exactly what it takes to go from anonymous private to the most decorated enlisted man in the army. And I promise you, the reality is more dramatic, more intense, and more inspiring than any Hollywood movie. This is the story of raw courage, the kind that can only come from a man who refused to let his brothers in arms down no matter the cost. Don't miss Part 2. Click that notification bell so YouTube lets you know the moment it drops. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten heroes, leave a comment below. Tell me, have you heard of Maurice Britt before? What other unknown heroes should I cover? This channel exists because of viewers like you who appreciate real history. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, you've only scratched the surface of this incredible story.
Welcome back to the incredible story of Maurice Footsie Britt, the most decorated private soldier in United States Army history. If you missed Part 1, stop right now and go watch it. Seriously, you need the full context of how a professional football player from Arkansas became one of World War II's greatest heroes. For those of you who are caught up, let's pick up where we left off. It's September 1943. Sicily has fallen, and now the Allies are preparing for something even more ambitious, the invasion of mainland Italy itself. Maurice Britt, still a private despite his growing reputation, is about to face the deadliest combat of his life. This is where legends are made. This is where impossible courage becomes reality. And this is where Maurice Britt earns every single one of those decorations. Let's get into it. Quick reminder before we dive into the action, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button now. This channel brings you the stories that history forgot, and Part 3 of Maurice's story is going to absolutely blow your mind. September 9th, 1943. Operation Avalanche, the Allied invasion of Italy at Salerno. Maurice Britt and the 3rd Infantry Division stormed the beaches under withering fire. The enemy knew the Allies were coming and had prepared a reception designed to drive the invaders back into the sea. The landing was chaos. Artillery rained down on the beaches. Machine gun fire raked the landing craft before they even reached shore. Men died before their boots touched Italian sand. But Maurice Britt and his comrades pushed forward, because that's what infantrymen do. They advance regardless of the cost. The battle for Salerno lasted 9 days. 9 days of absolute hell. The enemy counterattacked repeatedly, nearly pushing the Allies back into the ocean. At one point, the situation was so desperate that naval gunfire support and strategic bomber strikes were the only things preventing a complete disaster. But the Americans held, just barely. Maurice Britt fought through all of it, his rifle accounting for enemy casualties, his presence steadying the men around him. But Salerno was just the beginning. Once the beachhead was secured, the Allies began the long, bloody push northward through Italy, and this is where Maurice Britt's story becomes extraordinary. It happened near Mignano, a small town along the winter line, formidable defensive positions across the Italian peninsula.
The date was November 10, 1943. Maurice's unit was tasked with capturing a strategic hill that overlooked Allied supply routes. The enemy understood the hill's importance and defended it with everything they had. The attack began at dawn. Maurice's company advanced up the hill under intense artillery and mortar fire. Men fell. The advance stalled. Machine guns positioned in concrete bunkers poured fire into the American ranks. It was a killing ground, and Maurice's company was dying in it. This is the moment. This is when Maurice Britt became a legend. Maurice identified the machine gun position that was causing the most casualties, a fortified bunker about 150 yards up the hill. Without waiting for orders, without hesitation, Maurice grabbed extra grenades and began working his way toward the bunker. He moved fast, using every crater and rock for cover. Enemy bullets kicked up dirt around him. Shrapnel from mortar rounds whistled past his head. Maurice kept moving. When he got within grenade range, Maurice stood up, fully exposed to enemy fire, and hurled grenades with the accuracy of the professional athlete he was. The first grenade landed short. The second exploded near the bunker entrance. The third went straight into the firing port. The machine gun fell silent. But Maurice wasn't done. While the enemy soldiers were still reeling from the grenade attack, Maurice charged the bunker, alone. He fired his rifle through the opening, eliminating the surviving crew members, and secured the position. The threat was neutralized. The American advance could continue. For this action, Maurice Britt was awarded the Silver Star, the third highest military decoration for valor. His citation spoke of gallantry and action and complete disregard for personal safety. But here's the incredible part. Maurice considered this just another day at work. To him, he'd simply done what needed to be done to protect his fellow soldiers. This was just the first medal. The best was yet to come. Combat is unforgiving. No matter how skilled, how brave, or how lucky you are, eventually the odds catch up with you. For Maurice Britt, that moment came during the continued fighting along the Winter Line. During an intense firefight, an enemy mortar round exploded near Maurice's position. Shrapnel tore through his body, causing severe wounds. Any normal soldier would have been evacuated immediately. Maurice refused. He had his wounds bandaged in the field and continued fighting. His reasoning was simple. His unit needed every rifle, and as long as he could pull a trigger, he was staying. This earned Maurice his first Purple Heart, the medal awarded to soldiers wounded in combat. But Maurice saw it differently.
To him, the wound was an inconvenience, not a badge of honor. There was still a war to win. After several more days of fighting, Maurice's wounds became infected. The pain was excruciating. Finally, reluctantly, Maurice agreed to evacuation to a field hospital. The doctors couldn't believe he'd been fighting for days with such serious wounds. They treated the infection, stitched him up, and told him he'd earned a ticket back to a rear area unit for recovery. Maurice Britt had other plans. As soon as he could walk without limping too badly, Maurice went AWOL from the hospital and returned to his unit on the front lines. His commanders should have punished him for leaving the hospital without authorization. Instead, they welcomed him back. They needed men like Maurice Britt more than they needed military protocol. And now we come to it. The action that would earn Maurice Britt the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. The date was November 10, 1943, near the town of Mignano Montelungo. Yes, the same day as his Silver Star action. Maurice Britt earned two of America's highest decorations on the same day. Let that sink in. After capturing the first enemy bunker, Maurice's company continued its advance. But they ran into another defensive position, this one even more formidable. Multiple machine gun nests, interconnected trenches, and a large number of enemy infantry. The American attack had stalled again, and casualties were mounting rapidly. Maurice looked at the situation and made a decision. Someone had to break the enemy position where the entire attack would fail. Maurice decided that someone would be him. What happened next sounds like fiction, but it's all documented in military records and witness statements. Maurice Britt, armed only with his rifle and grenades,
single-handedly assaulted the enemy position. He moved from one machine gun nest to another, throwing grenades and firing his rifle with deadly accuracy. Enemy soldiers fell, the survivors retreated or surrendered. But during this assault, Maurice was wounded again, severely this time. A burst of machine gun fire struck his right arm, causing devastating injuries. His arm was nearly torn off. The pain must have been indescribable. Blood poured from the wound. Maurice Britt kept fighting. With one arm essentially useless, Maurice continued his assault using his left hand. He threw grenades left-handed. He fired his rifle one-handed, bracing it against his body, and he kept advancing. Witnesses reported seeing Maurice moving forward while leaving a trail of blood behind him, but never slowing down, never stopping, until the enemy position was completely neutralized. Only after the objective was secured did Maurice allow himself to collapse. Medics rushed forward and were horrified by the extent of his injuries. Maurice had lost massive amounts of blood. His right arm was destroyed beyond repair. By all rights, he should have been dead. But Maurice Britt was still alive, still conscious, and his first question to the medics was, "Did we take the objective?" They had, thanks to him. Maurice was evacuated immediately, this time with no chance of returning to combat. His wounds were too severe. The doctors at the field hospital stabilized him, but it quickly became clear that his right arm couldn't be saved. The damage was too extensive, the shattered bones and torn flesh beyond repair. Maurice Britt's arm was amputated. For most men, this would be the end of the story, a tragic conclusion to a military career. For a professional athlete, losing an arm meant the end of all dreams of returning to football. Maurice's life as he had known it was over. But Maurice Britt wasn't most men. Even as he recovered from his amputation, even as he processed the reality that he would never play football again, Maurice maintained his dignity and his spirit. When fellow patients in the hospital felt sorry for themselves, Maurice encouraged them. When nurses asked if he needed anything, Maurice asked if there was anything he could do to help other wounded soldiers. The Army recognized Maurice's extraordinary valor by awarding him the Medal of Honor. The citation detailed his actions on November 10, 1943, describing how he single-handedly destroyed 3 enemy machine gun nests, killed several enemy soldiers, and inspired his unit to victory despite receiving wounds that resulted in the loss of his right arm. But Maurice received more than just the Medal of Honor. His Silver Star for the first assault, a Purple Heart with oak leaf cluster for his multiple wounds, and later other decorations for his previous actions in North Africa and Sicily. By the time all the medals were accounted for, Private Maurice, Footsie, Britt, had become the most decorated private soldier in United States Army history. Let me take a moment to emphasize something important. Maurice Britt wasn't a superhero. He wasn't invulnerable. He felt fear like every other soldier. He knew that charging machine gun nests meant probable death. He understood the odds. But Maurice had something that transcended fear, a sense of responsibility to his fellow soldiers.
In interviews after the war, Maurice explained his mindset simply. I couldn't let my buddies down. They were depending on me, and I was depending on them. That's all there was to it. This is the essence of battlefield courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear because others are counting on you. Maurice Britt embodied this principle completely. His fellow soldiers worshipped him. In a war where enlisted men often resented officers and viewed medals with cynicism, Maurice Britt was universally respected and admired. Why? Because he was one of them. He never pulled rank because he never had any rank to pull. He led by example, fighting alongside his men rather than commanding them from behind. There's a particular quote from one of Maurice's squad mates that captures this perfectly. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, Britt was the kind of guy who made you want to be better. You'd see him doing something brave, and you'd think, well, if Footsie can do it, I guess I can too. He made heroes out of regular guys, just by being around them. That's leadership, real leadership. Let's talk about all the medals Maurice Britt earned during his service. The Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, awarded for conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. The Silver Star,
the third highest military combat decoration awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. The Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, awarded for being wounded in combat on multiple occasions. The European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with Battle Stars, recognizing participation in multiple campaigns across 3 theaters of war. The World War II Victory Medal, awarded to all service members who served during the war, and several other unit commendations and service medals. For a private, remember, Maurice Britt remained a private throughout his combat service. This collection of decorations was unprecedented. Officers with years of service didn't have medals like this. Generals rarely accumulated such a distinguished record. And yet here was Maurice, an enlisted man who started the war at the absolute bottom of the military hierarchy, wearing more decorations than men twice his rank. The Army, recognizing the absurdity of their most decorated soldier being a private, did eventually promote Maurice. But it wasn't until after his combat service ended, and even then, Maurice remained humble about the promotion. He'd earned his reputation as a private, and that's how he wanted to be remembered. Maurice spent months recovering from his wounds. The loss of his arm required extensive rehabilitation. He had to relearn basic tasks: writing, eating, dressing himself. Every simple action that healthy people take for granted became a challenge. But Maurice approached his recovery with the same determination he'd shown in combat. He refused to feel sorry for himself. He worked tirelessly with physical therapists. He encouraged other wounded veterans who were struggling with their own injuries. And slowly, Maurice rebuilt his life. The question everyone asked was, what would Maurice Britt do now? Professional football was impossible. His athletic career was over. What future did a one-armed war hero have? That's a question we'll answer in Part 3, because Maurice Britt's story doesn't end with his combat service. In fact, some would argue that his most important contributions came after the war, when he used his fame and his example to inspire a generation of Americans. We've covered Maurice's military service in detail, from his enlistment as a private to his extraordinary valor in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. We've seen how a professional football player became the most decorated private soldier in American history. We've witnessed courage that defies belief. But the story isn't over. Not even close. In Part 3, we're going to explore what Maurice Britt did after the war. How did he adjust to civilian life? What became of this legendary soldier? And what lessons can we learn from his example today? I'm going to tell you right now, Part 3 might surprise you even more than Parts 1 and 2, because Maurice Britt's post-war life was every bit as remarkable as his military service. Make sure you're subscribed because Part 3 drops soon and you won't want to miss it. And here's my question for you. What would you do in Maurice Britt's position? Seriously, think about it. You've lost your arm, your athletic career is over, your military service is finished. How do you move forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're appreciating these deep dives into real heroes, give this video a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm show these stories to more people who need to hear them. Part 3 is coming. The conclusion of Maurice Britt's incredible story. Don't miss it.
Welcome to Part 3, the final chapter in the extraordinary life of Maurice Footsie Britt, the most decorated private soldier in United States Army history. In Parts 1 and 2, we followed Maurice from his days as a professional football player through his legendary combat service in World War II. We saw him earn the Medal of Honor, the Silver Star, multiple Purple Hearts, and a place in history. But Maurice's story doesn't end on the battlefields of Italy. What Maurice accomplished after losing his arm in combat is even more inspiring than his military heroics. This is the story of a man who refused to let his wounds define him. This is Part 3, the conclusion. Before we start, if you've been watching without subscribing, hit that subscribe button now. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the heroes history forgot. Maurice Britt returned to the United States in early 1944,
not as the professional football player who had left, but as a decorated war hero, missing his right arm. One day you're Maurice the athlete, the next day you're Maurice the amputee, facing a future without the career you'd planned. The Army sent Maurice on a publicity tour. He gave speeches, attended war bond rallies, and met with politicians. He was a living symbol of American courage. But Maurice hated it. While he was giving speeches to comfortable civilians, his friends were still dying in Italy. His unit was still fighting. Maurice felt survivor guilt. Why did he get to come home when so many others didn't? But Maurice Britt wasn't the type to wallow in guilt. He started looking for ways to continue serving. That's when Maurice discovered his true calling: public service. In 1946, Maurice Britt ran for lieutenant governor of Arkansas. This was audacious. Maurice had no political experience. He was only 27 years old, and he was running against established politicians with powerful machines behind them. But Maurice had something they didn't: a Medal of Honor and a story that resonated with every voter. His campaign was simple: honest leadership from a man who had proven his character under fire. No corruption, no special interests. Arkansas voters responded. Maurice won and became lieutenant governor at age 27, one of the youngest in American history. Maurice approached politics like combat: careful planning, decisive action, and focus. He didn't play political games. He worked tirelessly for Arkansas, particularly on veterans issues. He advocated for improved benefits, better medical care, and programs to help veterans transition to civilian life. When Maurice Britt spoke about veterans' challenges, everyone listened. In 1946, Maurice met Geneva. She saw past his medals and missing arm. She saw the intelligent, kind, principled man beneath. They married that year. Geneva supported his political career, helped him adjust to life with one arm, and gave him a family. Maurice could have been bitter about his amputation, angry about his stolen football career. Instead, he chose a life defined by purpose and service. Geneva was instrumental in that choice. After serving as lieutenant governor, Maurice entered business. He owned car dealerships, treating employees fairly, and building a reputation for integrity. Customers knew that buying from Maurice Britt meant getting a fair deal from a man whose word meant something. His business success allowed him to support veterans' causes. He donated to veterans' organizations, funded scholarships for children of fallen soldiers, and quietly helped struggling veterans. Maurice didn't publicize these acts. The work itself was the reward. Maurice maintained strong military connections throughout his life. He attended veterans' reunions regularly, where he was treated like royalty. But Maurice always deflected praise, insisting the real heroes were the men who didn't come home. The Army invited Maurice to speak at military functions. Maurice used these occasions to remind people that heroism isn't about glory, it's about duty. His speeches were powerful because they came from genuine humility. One story captures Maurice's character perfectly. A young Vietnam veteran, struggling with his wounds, approached Maurice feeling depressed and hopeless. Maurice spent hours with him, sharing his struggles and explaining how he learned to live fully despite his amputation. That soldier later wrote that their conversation had saved his life. He'd been contemplating suicide. Maurice's response was modest. He was glad to help and told the soldier to pay it forward. This is who Maurice Britt was, a man who used his suffering to ease others' suffering. Maurice lived a long, full life. He remained active in business, politics, and veterans affairs. He watched his children grow, became a grandfather, and built a legacy beyond his medals.
In 1995, 50 years after his Medal of Honor action, Maurice attended World War II commemorative events. Younger veterans marveled at meeting a living Medal of Honor recipient from the greatest generation. But Maurice was uncomfortable with hero worship. He repeatedly emphasized that he was just doing his job,
that thousands did equally brave things without medals, and that the war's real success was the peace and prosperity that followed. Maurice Britt died in 1995, months after those events. He was 76. His death made national news, but the most moving tributes came from ordinary people. Veterans he'd helped, employees he'd treated fairly, constituents he'd served with integrity. At his funeral, speakers noted he'd lived 3 extraordinary lives: athlete, soldier, civilian. But what made Maurice special wasn't his accomplishments, it was his character. Maurice was fundamentally a good man who did his best in every situation. What can we learn from Maurice Britt's story? First, circumstances don't define us. Our choices do. Maurice lost his arm, his athletic career, nearly his life. Instead of becoming bitter, he chose a life defined by service. We are not our limitations. We are what we choose to do despite them. Second, true heroism is about responsibility, not glory. Maurice didn't want medals. He acted because his friends needed him, because the mission required it. Real courage means doing what must be done because it's right. Third, service doesn't end when the crisis passes. Maurice found new ways to serve in politics, business, and charity. The purpose of surviving a crisis is using that survival to make things better for others. Finally, resilience. Physical resilience, fighting despite wounds. Emotional resilience, building happiness despite loss. Moral resilience, maintaining integrity despite pressure. Maurice's resilience was quiet, consistent, and sustained over decades. How many other Maurice Britts are out there? How many extraordinary people served, did incredible things, and quietly returned to civilian life without recognition? Thousands. World War II was fought by millions who did extraordinary things without medals or recognition. They did their duty, survived or didn't, and either returned home or rest forever in military cemeteries. This is why channels like this matter. Not to glorify war. War is terrible. But to remember that when war becomes necessary, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage. To ensure sacrifices like Maurice's aren't forgotten. Maurice was representative of his generation. Men and women who faced unprecedented challenges with courage and sacrifice. The world they built stands as their monument. In one of his last interviews, Maurice was asked what message he wanted to leave. His answer? Do your duty, take care of each other, and don't waste the opportunities you've been given. That's it. Just a straightforward message from a man who lived by those principles. Do your duty, fulfill your responsibilities to the best of your ability. Take care of each other. We're all in this together. Don't waste your opportunities, whether from your talents, circumstances, or other sacrifices. Maurice lived by these principles. The result was a life of remarkable accomplishment and genuine meaning. Maurice Footsie Britt's story is more than a war story. It's about character, resilience, finding purpose in service, about choosing to build rather than destroy, to contribute rather than take, to lift others up rather than tear them down. We face challenges today. Different than Maurice's, but real challenges nonetheless. And in these times, Maurice's example becomes even more relevant. We need people who do their duty without expecting a reward. People who take care of each other, even when it's difficult. People who won't waste their opportunities, but will use them to make things better. Maurice was that person. If a one-armed veteran from Arkansas could build such an extraordinary life after losing so much, after giving up a professional sports career, after losing his dominant arm, after watching friends die, What excuse do the rest of us have for not doing the same? That's the real lesson. Not that we should all be war heroes, hopefully we'll never face that test, but that we should embody the qualities Maurice demonstrated: courage in the face of fear, resilience in the face of loss, integrity when it would be easier to compromise, service when we could choose comfort, and humility when we achieve success. These qualities aren't reserved for soldiers or special people. They're available to anyone willing to develop them. Maurice Britt proved that your circumstances at birth don't determine your destiny. He was a kid from rural Arkansas during the Depression. No wealth, no connections, no advantages except character, work ethic, and determination. And he became a professional athlete, a war hero, a political leader, and a successful businessman. Not because life handed him opportunities, but because he created them through his choices. This is the end of Maurice Britt's story. 3 chapters. An extraordinary life, an extraordinary story. If you want more stories like this, forgotten heroes, untold battles, the human side of history, this channel is for you. Next week, I'll cover another incredible story, a British soldier whose actions saved hundreds, but whose name has been almost completely forgotten. Subscribe, like, comment, and thanks for joining me. See you next time. Take care.